demonstration along a lunch counter near this site and was soon joined by students from Winston-Salem Teachers College, Atkins High School, and Wake Forest College. The nonviolent protest led to a desegregation agreement signed May the 23rd by the city of local businesses. Mr. Matthews, the leader, was the first black served as a desegregated county on May the 25th. The protest ended in a record 107 days.
Today I will try to give you a free history lesson. There are many of you out there today who do not know what we had to go through with to get to where we are today. To those of us who can think back and remember back to the times when blacks couldn't do this and we couldn't do that. When we couldn't stand here and we couldn't stand there. When we couldn't sit down over here and when we couldn't sit down over there. When blacks were treated less than human beings. When blacks were sometimes treated less than dogs.
I am a freedom fighter of long standing. The sit-in movement, as we all know, the sit-in movement was started in Greensboro at A&T College on February the 1st, 1960. 1 week later, I sat down alone and launched the sit-in movement in the city of Winston-Salem.
Yes, sir, I remember that.
At this particular time, the students at Winston-Salem Teachers College, and the reason that I say that they're number one in the nation is because Greensboro, people don't know this, but after Greensboro started the movement, Greensboro gave an announcement that they were quitting. ACP was taking up money all around the nation.
Yes, sir.
To help the people who were out in the street fighting for freedom. None of this money came to us. Once the sit-in movement was over and we had a success story, the first victory in the state of North Carolina, then the NAACP stepped in and said, we paid this, we paid that, we paid this, we paid that. Unless they served us. The sit-in movement victory of May 1960, I think it's important that people know this, was in fact the falling domino which triggered the chain reaction to breaking down the major barriers of segregation in the state of North Carolina and the United States of America. There would not have been a march on Washington if it had not been for the sit-in movement, because the army that marched on Washington came from the rank and file of the sit-in movement. We all know who the generals were, but the people who composed the rank and file came from the sit-in movement. There never would have been a Civil Rights Bill of 1964 had it not been for the army of the Civil Rights Movement standing over the government and standing behind the black generals who went to Washington. And there never would have been a voting rights bill if it had not been. It goes, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice.
Yes, sir.
The first thing, establish justice.
Yes, sir.
It may take some time, but justice will be established. So even going through hardships and going through chaos, I never lost the faith that right would prevail over wrong.
Well, I certainly hope everybody learned something this morning about the sit-in movement. A lot of people have known that the first victory in the sit-in movement was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. But then there are a lot of people who don't know that. Back in 1996, when I was interviewing Carl Matthews about the sit-in movement in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, I myself didn't know at that time that the first victory took place in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And that was 36 years after it took place. I know after interviewing him, I contacted a lot of the elected officials, and some of them were surprised to know that the first victory in the sit-in movement took place in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So in May of 1998, I joined forces with a lady from Wake Forest University by the name of Susan Faust, and she compiled a booklet, and the three of us, Mr. Matthews and myself and Susan Faust, we went to Raleigh to speak to the State Historical Advisory Committee about a marker being put in the city of Winston-Salem, identifying it as the first city that desegregated lunch counters in the sit-in movement. And we had to go back 3 times because each time they turned us down. And finally, as a result of funding from sources that I'm not familiar with, the marker was finally established February 23rd in the year 2000. That has been the only year since that there has been a commemorative event with respect to identifying Winston-Salem as being the first city to desegregate lunch counters in the sit-in movement. Oddly enough, there are reasons why this transpired. There are reasons why it took 36 years for Mr. Matthews to get an opportunity to go on the airwaves and tell the truth about that situation. Now, you know, you think about people. I just want to say this is why this is important. You think about the fact that you have a high school, a college, you have athletic programs in these high schools and colleges. No one ever forgets the first championship team, regardless of what sport it is. No one ever forgets the first championship team. The reason is because that team sets the standard of excellence for the entire program. You think about musicians, you think about actors, you think about actresses. None of them ever forget that first Grammy or that first Golden Globe or that first Oscar that they achieve. No one forgets that first award because it sets the standard of excellence. Why is it that everyone wanted to forget and erase the fact that the first victory in the sit-in movement took place in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina?